is what normalizes it. The curve is what means that when you send your patient to a neuropsychologist and they say this person has a mild impairment, they're not just saying, you know what, I've seen 7,000 patients in my career and she looks mild. I would guess mild. What they're saying is that in comparison to the normative sample for that test, this person performs in that 13th in that 13th percentile on the left. That's what we're always kind of measuring up against. In terms of disorders or different conditions that can be identified on the basis of intelligence testing, we're not using intelligence testing to tell us everything about cognitive performance. It's actually a small range. I don't do much intelligence testing per se. But intelligence testing can help to identify intellectual disabilities. We don't use intelligence testing to identify dementia, but we do know that dementia is one of those conditions that can lead to a decrease of overall intellectual ability over time. And then in some people with autism, we actually have savantism, which indicates that a person will have a unique and extraordinarily developed skill in a very, very narrow area, and often something that is not functionally meaningful. So a person might be able to tell you the day of the week of any calendar date in all of human recordable history. And that's great if you just happen to encounter people every day who need that specific information. The invasion of Normandy occurred on a Wednesday. The Magna Carta was signed on a Friday. But most of us don't actually need that information, and so that's not helpful to that individual. These unique but highly developed skills are also disjunctive to the remainder of their intellectual ability. That same person might not be able to dress themselves, to learn other types of information, or to apply and manipulate information in a meaningful way. So intellectual disability, formerly called mental retardation, dementia, and savantism are three conditions that are associated with performance on tests of intellect. Attention and processing, these are the primary modalities. If you don't pay attention to something, it doesn't get in. There's no further processing of it. I could ask everybody in this room right now what color the dot is on the back wall. Right, and nobody would know, right? Okay, so there's a bright green light that I'm thinking of as a dot, and it's on the back wall, but nobody would know because nobody attended to it, despite the fact that pretty much everyone except for me has been in this room at least once, right? Okay, but you would have never attended to it. You would have never placed it into your memory. You would have never processed it because it wasn't an important piece of information. There are multiple types of attention. And when we look at conditions such as ADHD, for example, we need to be really careful that we're examining the various types of attention and not just attending to one or two aspects. And that becomes even more important for adults. There are various tests that we can use to look at attention. So I'm going to show you a few of those just briefly. For simple attention span, the ability to hold an amount of information in the mind, we can do that verbally using digit span. So I could recite a series of numbers to you at a 1 second parsing, and then ask you to recite them back to me, and the number series get longer and longer and longer, and we see how much you're able to hold. Or we could do that same thing using Corsi blocks, in which I would touch the top of a sequence of blocks in a pattern. Did anybody ever play the game Simon when you were a kid? The light up? No Simon? Okay. Okay. Oh God, I'm old. Okay. Well, it kind of runs along the same idea that you would have a series of things that you would touch in a certain order, and then the patient would touch them. On the examiner's side, this is numbered. On the patient's side, it's not numbered. They have to remember the sequence, which means they have to hold it in their span of memory. There's also focused attention, which we can test with activities like digit symbol. where we would have a series of symbols, a series of numbers, and the patient is instructed to place the correct symbol, match it to its number, and to fill in as many of these as they can. And typically they have anywhere from 90 seconds to 120 seconds on some of these. But you're looking for their speed of processing, but also for their ability to focus and sustain on their attention. Selective attention can be measured with cancellation tasks. So you present a stimulus and you ask the patient to go through and to cross out that stimulus, meaning that they also have to ignore other competing visual stimuli. You can make it harder by having different types of rules. You might have them cross out both items, or you might instruct them that they're only to cross out one of those two. But cancellation tasks measure the selective attention capacity. Sustained attention and vigilance, I wanted to be able to show you, but it actually doesn't work on the screen in any meaningful way, so I'll just tell you about it. I want you to imagine a computer screen that's completely black. I want you to think in terms of microwave minutes for this one. And on this black screen for 14 minutes, there will flash at different intervals a series of letters, one at a time. Sometimes they'll flash slowly, sometimes they'll flash more quickly. And you are to strike the space bar on a computer every time that you see a letter, except for a certain identified letter. So you have to inhibit whenever you see that item. And this goes on for 14 of the longest minutes of anyone's life. But it measures vigilance, because we're not just attending to things for very brief periods of time. You guys have to attend to what I'm saying for a really long amount of time today. And so we need to be able to test that, for instance, for people who want to return to work and they've had a head injury and their attention has been compromised. Can they attend successfully at work? We also need to do the same thing for people with ADHD. They might do just fine on the other tasks, but they can't pay attention long enough on a lecture or to a book that they're reading in order to focus. Alternating attention is another format in which you shift back and forth between stimuli. The trail making test does that by asking you to alternate between numbers and letters. So you're going to draw a line from 1 to A to 2, 2 to B, B to 3, and so on. And then we have divided attention, and in its verbal component, this one can be really nicely measured on the PACE-AT, which is the Paced Auditory Serial Addition task, and that reads out a series of 60 numbers in 4 different rate segments. So 2.4 seconds, 2.4, no, is it 2.4? Sorry, 2.0, 1.4, 1.6, 1.4, 1.2. So you have a series of numbers, and your instruction is to add the number that you heard to the number that immediately preceded it without summing all of the different numbers together. And it becomes obviously harder and harder as the amount of time for your response shrinks. There are multiple brain structures that are relevant to attention. So these things don't just come out as pen and paper exercises. They also directly relate back to areas such as the ascending reticular activating system. The frontal lobes have various areas, various regions that seem to be involved in different formats of attention. Can you guys see this one? Is this clear for you? Okay. Okay, because I don't want to read the slide. But there are also areas outside of the frontal lobes that have turned out to be, over time, we're learning more and more important. We weren't actually sure about the involvement of the right hemisphere in attention early on, but the right hemisphere is more active in spatial attention. The disorders that you can find associated with attention dysregulation can be ADHD. You might also find hemispatial neglect or hemispatial inattention. You'll find attentional dysregulation in most people with traumatic brain injuries. It also shows up in depression or anxiety. Fatigue can be a major component, so fatigue-related disorders. And also some medication side effects can promote inattention. Moving to language. Language we can think of as a symbolic communication system, and it's reliant on a breakdown of language into phonemes, syntax, and also semantics. There are various, and here's one where I think I'm going to get both sides of the room. So the people who aren't in psychiatry are probably also familiar with aphasia, correct? Okay, so when we're looking at the aphasias, it's important to realize that the aphasias are a collection of behaviors, essentially. They're not related to just a specific disease entity. It's not that you get this disease and then you have aphasia, although you will have aphasia associated with specific regions of the brain. But what is causing that, the etiology of the change in that region, could be a traumatic event, it could be a stroke, it's very often a stroke. You know, a left middle cerebral artery stroke is sort of your classic region for finding aphasia. But you could also have other neurodegenerative illnesses that affect patients and eventually, because of their deterioration in those same areas of the brain, lead to aphasia. So aphasia isn't specific to any one disease, but it can occur in a number of neuropathic conditions. Let's see, I think I've said everything that's on this slide. Oh, no. We need to also make sure, though, that we distinguish between aphasia and other speech disturbances, particularly motor disturbances of speech that don't reflect an inability to express or comprehend language. I really liked this slide. I'm not kidding when I say since '97 I've looked at many things to talk about aphasia. And most of them, to be honest, look like this, right? So I could either talk to you guys about this slide or I could talk to you about this one. Guess which one I'm going to go for. So this breaks down the ways in which we can distinguish different types of aphasia really nicely in just 3 quick questions. So